The recording is still on the drive in my desk. I haven't played it in months, but I know exactly where the timestamp sits. 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 9 seconds into a 48-hour passive capture of the 11-meter shortwave band on a Tuesday in early autumn. I labeled the file something boring at the time. Atmospheric anomaly north quadrant.wave. I labeled it that because I didn't know what else to call it, and because if I'd written what I actually thought I was hearing, I would have deleted it the next morning out of embarrassment. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what was on the recording. The fact that I almost erased it before the world had a chance to need it. I'm going to tell you what happened in the order I learned it, which is not the same as the order it occurred. I'd rather get it right than get it dramatic. 3 days. That's all the warning was. 3 days from the moment I caught the signal to the moment the first person in our county opened their mouth and didn't sound like a person anymore. I had 3 days to do something, and I spent most of them trying to convince a small number of people that I wasn't losing my mind. By the time I gave up trying, there was no one left to convince. My name is Idris Valen. I'm 34. Before all of this, I worked from home doing acoustic analysis for a company that did environmental compliance work. Wind farm noise studies mostly, plus the occasional municipal complaint about a transformer humming on someone's property line. It's the kind of job that sounds interesting at parties for about 11 seconds, and then never again. The relevant part is that I had decent equipment in my house. A pair of calibrated field microphones, a spectrum analyzer that cost more than my first car, and a shortwave receiver I'd been using since I was a teenager, because some habits don't quit you. I had a small shed in the back of the property that I'd insulated and run power and Ethernet out to. My wife called it the Radio Shack. I called it the office. We were both wrong, but she was less wrong. Hadley, my wife, did not love the shed. She tolerated it the way you tolerate a friend's hobby that you don't share. I'd come in at 1 in the morning with headphones still around my neck, and she'd ask what I'd been listening to, and I'd say something like, "Numbers station out of Eastern Europe, I think Cuban relay." And she'd say, and roll over. She wasn't mocking me. She just had her own things. She was finishing a master's in occupational therapy, and most nights she was reading about how to help old people get out of bathtubs. The third person in this story is my brother-in-law, Pell. Pell Auberry, Hadley's older brother, 2 years and a head of gray on her. He was a paramedic, which becomes relevant. Pell was the kind of guy who'd seen enough to be unflappable about almost anything, and skeptical about everything else. He had a daughter from a marriage that hadn't worked out, a 6-year-old named Wren, who came to our house on weekends, and a dry, careful way of asking questions that made you feel like you were being assessed. He lived 11 miles away in town. We were in a stretch of unincorporated county, where the houses are far enough apart that you can shoot a deer rifle in the yard if you want to, and no one calls the sheriff. Those are the people who matter. Everyone else who shows up in this story is going to show up briefly and then exit. Not because they didn't matter to themselves, just because they didn't get to stay. The capture was running because I'd left it running. I did that sometimes when conditions on the band looked interesting. A coronal hole rotating into geo-effective position, an SQ disturbance, anything that might produce an anomaly worth pulling out of the noise later. That Tuesday afternoon, the K index had jumped without warning, which usually means propagation gets weird for a while. I set the receiver to capture the entire 11-meter band at 24-bit depth and went inside to make dinner. I didn't think about it again until Wednesday evening, when I sat down at the workstation to skim the spectrogram. I almost missed it. That's the part I want you to hear clearly. I scrolled past it the first time. The waterfall display on the spectrum analyzer shows you frequency on one axis and time on the other, with amplitude rendered as color. Most of what you see is structured. Carriers, sidebands, the regular pulse of digital modes, the occasional sweep of a chirp sounder. What I scrolled past, and then scrolled back to, was a vertical streak. Narrow, almost too narrow to be real, sitting at 27.665 megahertz for exactly 9 seconds, then gone. No fade in, no fade out. A hard rectangle of energy that started and stopped like someone had thrown a switch. I pulled up the audio. At first there was nothing, just the hiss of the band. Then a tone. Not a sine wave, not white noise, something in between, with a texture I'd describe as wet, if you forced me to describe it at all. The tone rose and fell across roughly 5 seconds in a pattern that I would have called speech if it had been in any frequency range that a human throat can produce. It wasn't. The fundamental sat around 600 hertz, with overtones that didn't behave like overtones. They were inharmonic, not integer multiples, more like the partials of a struck bell than the harmonics of a voice. And then, layered underneath, a sequence of clicks. Counted, spaced precisely. 72 clicks. I went back and counted them 3 times to make sure. Below that, almost in the noise floor, there was a second pattern. I only found it because I ran the recording through a denoising algorithm I'd written for picking voices out of wind farm ambient. What came out was a sequence of pulses too short to perceive individually at normal playback, but slowed down by a factor of 16, they resolved into something that sounded almost like syllables. Not English, not any language I recognized, but syllables, with cadence, with the rise and fall of intention. I want to be very clear about what I thought at this moment, because it's important to the rest of the story. I did not think aliens. The first thing I thought was, somebody is testing something. Probably the military. Probably a new digital mode on a band where it shouldn't be. The 11-meter band is technically the citizens' band, the same one truckers used to use, and the part above 27.405 megahertz is freebanding territory. Illegal, but full of pirates and hobbyists doing strange things. The second thing I thought was, this might be propagation doing something weird. Skywave returns from a buried test transmitter, or a digital broadcast that's been chopped up by selective fading until it sounds like something it isn't. I spent the rest of Wednesday night running the file through every analysis tool I owned. The clicks were exact. Their spacing varied by less than 2 milliseconds across the sequence, which ruled out almost any natural source I could think of. The wet tone. I started calling it the carrier voice because I had to call it something. Had no detectable modulation scheme. It wasn't AM, FM, single sideband, or any of the digital modes I knew. It was just sound, broadcast at an RF frequency, which doesn't make any physical sense. Radio signals aren't audio. You modulate audio onto a radio carrier and you demodulate it at the other end. What I was looking at was as if someone had cut out the middle step and broadcast the audio directly, which the physics doesn't allow, except apparently it had happened, on my equipment, on a Tuesday afternoon. I emailed Pell at 2 in the morning. I attached the file and the spectrogram and wrote 3 sentences. I told him I'd caught something strange, that I didn't know what it was, and that I wanted his take because he had a paramedic's habit of recognizing patterns under stress. He texted back at 6. The text said, "Looked at it. Sounds like a transformer dying. Get sleep." I didn't argue. Pell was usually right about everything, and on the rare occasions he wasn't, you didn't change his mind by texting him. I slept badly. Hadley left for class at 8. I drank coffee and sat at the kitchen table and listened to the slowed-down version of the second layer over my headphones, on loop, for an hour. By the third pass through, I started to feel something I didn't have a word for. Not fear. More like the way you feel when you walk into a room and you can tell someone was there a minute ago. The air slightly disturbed, a chair pulled out. Nothing definite, but the sense of recent presence. The syllables were not arranged randomly. They had structure, repetition. A pattern of 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, then a pause, and the cycle would start again with a small variation. Like a phrase being said by someone who was trying to make sure you understood by saying it again in a slightly different way. By mid-morning, I had decided to do something foolish, which was to write down what I thought I was hearing, even though I wasn't hearing anything in a language I knew. I sat with a notebook and I wrote, "This is a count. This is a warning. This is about people." I want to be clear. I didn't see those words. I felt them, in the way you feel the rhythm of a sentence before you understand it. I closed the notebook and put it in a drawer and went outside to split firewood, because that's what I do when I think I'm losing my grip on something. While I was splitting wood, the dogs across the road started barking. They were 2 old retrievers who barked at everything and nothing, and I usually tuned them out. This time they didn't stop. They barked for 40 minutes straight and then went silent, all at once, like a switch had been thrown. I didn't think anything of it until later, when I started cataloging the small wrongnesses of those 3 days. Hadley came home around 5. I made spaghetti. I told her about the recording in the lightest, most self-deprecating way I could. I said I'd caught something weird on the band and that Pell thought it was a transformer. I didn't tell her about the words in my notebook. She listened in the way she listened to my radio things, which was generous and incomplete. She asked if I was sleeping enough. I said I was. She said, "Idris, you've got circles under your eyes like you owe somebody money." I laughed because she wanted me to. That night Pell called, not texted, called. He said, "Send me that file again, the denoised version." I asked why. He said, "Don't ask me yet, just send it." I sent it. He hung up without saying goodbye, which wasn't unlike him. He called back at 11. Hadley was already asleep. I took the call in the shed. "Where did this come from?" he said. Not a question, a demand. I told him. The K-index, the passive capture, the streak on the waterfall. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. "Idris," he said. "I had a run today. Nursing home off Birchwood." An old woman started speaking in a rhythm. Not words, just counted sounds. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. Over and over. The staff thought she was having a stroke. Vitals were fine. She wouldn't stop. She did it for 2 hours and then she fell asleep, and when she woke up, she didn't remember. I sat down because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. "It's the same pattern," he said. "The one in your file. The underlayer." I asked him how sure he was. He said he'd counted. He'd counted twice. He said the rhythm on the recording and the rhythm out of the old woman's mouth matched. He said he didn't know what to do with that information, and he didn't want it, but he had it. I asked him if he'd told anyone else. He said no, and that he wasn't going to, because there was nothing to tell that wouldn't get him pulled in for a psych eval. I said I understood. He said, "Don't post this anywhere. Don't email it anywhere else. Hold it. We'll talk tomorrow." He hung up. I sat in the shed until 2 in the morning, watching the waterfall display crawl up the screen, watching nothing, because nothing else came through that band that night. Thursday morning I drove into town. I'm going to be honest. I drove in mostly because I needed to see other people behaving normally. I needed to walk into a gas station and watch someone buy a lottery ticket. I needed to see a kid on a skateboard. I needed the world to be the world. The gas station was fine. The kid on the skateboard was fine. But while I was paying for coffee, the cashier, a woman in her 50s with hair the color of dry hay, name tag said Maelis, paused while she was handing me my change. She was looking past me at the window. Not at anything. Past it. Her eyes weren't focused. Her mouth was slightly open. I waited. 5 seconds, maybe 7. Then she blinked, smiled, handed me the change and said, "Have a good one, hun," in the voice of someone who had not just stopped existing for 7 seconds in front of a stranger. I drove past the nursing home on the way home. I didn't go in. I don't know what I would have said. When I got back to the house, I sat at the workstation and I did the thing I should have done from the start, which was to look at the recording forensically. I ran the carrier voice through a pitch tracker and found that the frequency contour matched, to within 5%, the pitch contour of human distress vocalizations. Specifically, the kind a person makes when they're trying to warn another person about something physical and immediate. A falling object, an approaching car. I ran the underlayer through a rhythm analysis tool I'd built for tracking animal calls. The 312 pattern had a property I hadn't noticed. It was a binary encoding. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, with the long being a delimiter. If you read the shorts as zeros and the longs as ones, the sequence translated into a repeating string of numbers. The numbers, when interpreted as a geographic coordinate system I had to look up to verify, pointed to a location. The location was 18 miles north of my house, on county road that ran past a feed mill and dead-ended at a state forest boundary. I know this because I drove there on Thursday afternoon. I want to skip ahead, but I won't. The drive took 40 minutes. I passed 3 cars and a tractor. The radio in my truck started picking up a low hum somewhere around the 12-mile mark that wasn't on any station I could find. By the time I got to the coordinate, the hum had stopped. The coordinate was a wide spot on the road next to a pasture. There was no structure, no vehicle, no person. There was a circle of grass, maybe 20 feet across, where the grass was lying flat in a spiral pattern. Not in the cartoon way you see in pictures of crop circles, but the way grass looks when something has been resting on it for several hours and then left. The edge of the circle was sharp. Inside the circle, the grass was unbroken. Not crushed, just bent. Every blade pointing in the same direction, as if it had grown that way. I stood at the edge for a long time. I didn't step in. I'm not sure why. I took photographs from every angle. I took one short video. I walked the perimeter and looked for tire tracks, footprints, scorch marks, anything that would let me explain what I was looking at as the work of a person. There was nothing. The pasture was bounded by a barbed wire fence, and the fence was intact, the wire dust undisturbed. Whatever had bent the grass had not crossed the fence, which meant it had either come from above or had not, in any conventional sense, come at all. I'd like to say I had a moment of clarity there. I didn't. I had a moment of stillness, which is different. The wind moved across the pasture, and I could hear it moving across the bent grass with a slightly different sound than across the upright grass. A flatter sound, less rustle, more sigh. I drove home. On the way back, I called Pell. I told him about the coordinate, the circle, the photographs. He was at work. I could hear sirens in the background. He said, "Idris, I'm going to call you when I get off shift. Don't do anything until then." I said, "Okay." He said, "And don't put any of this online." I said, "Okay" again. I got home around 6. Hadley was in the kitchen, on the phone. Her face was the wrong color. She held up one finger to me and kept listening. I made out fragments. Her mother's name, the word hospital, the word agitated. Her mother lived 2 states away in a senior community. Hadley got off the phone and sat down at the table and said, "Mom's in the ER. She started doing something with her hands. They don't know what it is. She won't stop." I asked what she meant by something with her hands. Hadley looked at me. "A pattern. She's tapping a pattern on the bed rail. They thought she was having a seizure, but her brain scan is normal. She just won't stop tapping." I asked what the pattern was. I knew the answer. I asked anyway. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, Hadley said. Over and over. They timed it. It's perfectly regular. I told her then. I told her about the recording, about Pell's nursing home call, about the woman at the gas station, about the bent grass. I played her the slowed-down audio. I showed her the spectrogram. I showed her the photographs from the pasture. She didn't believe me. That's not quite right. She believed I believed me, and she was kind about it, which was worse. She said, "Idris, you're connecting things that don't connect. Mom has dementia." Old women in nursing homes do strange things. The cashier was zoning out. The grass. Okay, the grass is weird, but grass does strange things all the time. She said, "I love you. I'm scared about Mom, and I can't be scared about this too right now." I let it go. I let it go because I loved her, and because I was tired, and because she needed me to let it go. We ate dinner. She drank a glass of wine that she didn't finish. She went to bed at 9. I sat in the kitchen with my hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee and listened to the house tick. Pell called at 10:30. He'd had a long shift. He sounded like he'd had 3 long shifts in a row. "2 more," he said. "2 more what?" "2 more patients today doing the tap. One was an Alzheimer's case. The other was a 23-year-old who came in with a kidney stone. Started tapping his IV pole in the waiting room. Stopped after about 40 minutes. Doesn't remember it." I told him about Hadley's mother. He went very quiet. "It's spreading," he said. "Or something is spreading. I don't know what to call it." I asked him what we should do. He laughed, a short, dry sound that wasn't really a laugh. "I don't know, Idris. There's no protocol for this. There's no call." What am I supposed to tell my shift supervisor? "Hey, there's a frequency from outer space and people are tapping their bed rails? Get a grip." I said, "Pell, the recording said 3 days. The count was 72 clicks. That was Tuesday. We're at Thursday." He said, "Friday. Tomorrow." "Friday," he said again. We didn't say anything for a while. I could hear his refrigerator running. He said, "Ren's with her mother this weekend. I'm going to drive over there tomorrow morning and pick her up. I don't care what the custody schedule says. Get her. Bring her to your place. You and Hadley should be home. Don't go anywhere you don't have to." I said okay. I didn't ask him what he thought was coming. He didn't know any more than I did. We were 2 men guessing at the shape of a thing in the dark. I slept maybe an hour. Around 4 in the morning, I went out to the shed and started a second capture, this time wider. I opened up the receiver to scan from 25 to 30 megahertz with a higher resolution on the waterfall. I figured if there had been 1 transmission, there might be another. I figured wrong, but not in the way I expected. The second transmission came in at 5:47 a.m. I was at the workstation when it hit. The waterfall flared, not as a narrow streak this time, but as a band. A wide block of energy across nearly 2 megahertz, lasting 28 seconds, with a structure inside it I'd never seen before. There were 6 separate carriers nested within the band, each modulated differently, each carrying a different layer of information. I started recording, but the recording had started automatically the moment the signal exceeded the trigger threshold I'd set after the first event. When the signal stopped, the air in the shed felt different. I don't know how else to describe it. The way air feels right before a thunderstorm, but indoors, with no thunderstorm. I sat for a minute. Then I started to analyze. The 6 layers, when separated, contained different content. The first was the same wet tone from the first transmission, but extended. Over 20 seconds of it, with more inflection, more rise and fall. The second was a sequence of clicks, but the count had changed. There were now 24 clicks, evenly spaced. The third was the binary pulse pattern from before, but the coordinates had updated. The fourth was a new pattern entirely, a sequence of frequencies that, when I plotted them on a chart, traced out a curve I recognized. It was a logistic growth curve, the mathematical shape of a population explosion. The fifth layer was silence. Not noise, actual silence. 28 seconds of zero amplitude embedded in a transmission from a source that had no business existing. The sixth layer I couldn't decode. I still can't. It's on the drive in my desk, and I've spent more hours than I want to admit trying to make it resolve, and it never does. The updated coordinates were not 18 miles north anymore. They were 3 miles south. 3 miles south was the elementary school where my neighbor's kids went, where Wren would have gone if she lived with Pell full-time. The clicks had counted down. 24. 1 per hour, maybe, or 1 per something else. I called Pell. He answered on the second ring. I got another one, I said. When? 5:47. The count is 24 now. The coordinates have moved. They're pointing at the elementary school on Route 9. He didn't ask which school. He knew which school. I'm leaving for Wren's mother's place in 10 minutes, he said. I'll be at your house by noon. Lock everything. Don't answer the door for anyone except me. I said, Pell, what if I'm wrong about this? What if I'm wrong and I'm dragging you into something that's nothing? He said, Idris. The old woman at the nursing home died at 3 a.m. They don't know what from. Her heart just stopped. The 23-year-old kidney stone is in the ICU with a fever they can't explain. Hadley's mom is... He stopped. You're not wrong. I wish you were. I went inside. Hadley was in the kitchen, looking at her phone. She looked up when I came in, and she didn't say anything for a second. Mom died at 5 this morning, she said. Her voice was very flat. They don't know why. I went to her. She let me hold her for about a minute, and then she pulled back and looked at me. Tell me about the recording again, she said. All of it. Slow. I told her. I told her about the bent grass and the count and the underlayer and Pell's nursing home call and the gas station cashier and the second transmission that morning. I played her the second transmission. I showed her the curve from the fourth layer. When I finished, she sat very still for a long time. Then she said, Pack. We packed. We packed for an emergency without naming it. Water, food, the medications she took for thyroid, the medications her mother had taken that we had a leftover supply of, the dog's food. We had a dog, a 4-year-old shepherd mix named Brisket, who'd been ignoring this whole thing from the kitchen rug. We loaded the truck. We left the cars in the driveway in case we needed to move them later. We did not leave. We weren't going to leave the house yet. We were getting ready to leave the house. That distinction mattered to both of us at the time. Pell arrived at 11:40 with Wren in the back seat. Wren had her stuffed rabbit and a bag with 3 books in it. She came in and sat at the kitchen table and started reading, like she'd been told she had to. Pell pulled me into the shed. "I stopped at a pharmacy on the way," he said. "There were 2 people in there doing it. Not employees, customers. One was in his 30s. He was tapping the counter and the cashier was just staring at him. The other one was a woman by the magazine rack tapping her purse. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. They didn't know each other. They weren't synchronized. They were both just doing it." He showed me a video on his phone. It was 12 seconds long. It was exactly what he'd described. I asked him what he thought it meant. He said, "I think the signal you caught is telling them to do it. Or it's a side effect of something. I don't know. I'm a paramedic, Idris. I patch up car accidents." We went back inside. Hadley was in the living room with Wren, reading to her. Brisket was lying with his chin on Hadley's foot. The house was warm. Through the window I could see the late autumn light flat on the field across the road. The dogs across the road silent in their yard. The world looked normal. It was an obscene kind of normal because I knew what I knew, and the world didn't. That afternoon was the quietest part. We didn't talk much. Pell slept for 2 hours on the couch. Hadley made soup. Wren did a puzzle on the rug. I went out to the shed twice to check the receiver. Nothing new. The band was quiet. Too quiet. Even the regular chatter on the lower part of the citizens' band, the truckers and the local hobbyists, had thinned out to almost nothing. I tried the FM band. The local stations were running. One was running an emergency alert tone, which I caught the tail end of. Something about a public health advisory and recommendations to remain in your residence. I went back inside and turned on the television. The local news was running a banner across the bottom of the screen. Unusual behavioral event. Authorities investigating. Remain indoors if possible. We watched it together, the 4 of us. Wren on Hadley's lap. The anchor was a woman I'd seen for years, and she was reading copy that she didn't believe. You could see it in her face. She kept stumbling over the word reports. There were reports of widespread incidents of people exhibiting repetitive motor behavior, she said. There were reports of associated medical complications, she said. There were reports of fatalities. She paused for a second and looked off screen. And then she said, in a voice that wasn't on the prompter, "Folks, please stay home tonight. Please." The screen cut to color bars. Pell stood up. "It started," he said. He didn't say it dramatically. He said it the way you say something you've been waiting to be able to say. Friday night was when the second phase began. I don't know what to call it. The tapping was the first phase. The second phase was different. We had the curtains drawn, but I went to the window around 8 and pulled one back about an inch. The dogs across the road were standing in the yard. Both of them. Just standing. Their owner, a retired man named Albert Crawl, who I'd known for 9 years, was standing in his driveway with his back to me. His arms were at his sides. He wasn't moving. The dogs weren't moving. None of them appeared to be breathing. I let the curtain fall back. I told the others. We turned off all the lights. We sat in the dark in the living room, with the television muted. Brisket pressed against Hadley's leg. Wren asleep finally, with her head on Pell's shoulder. We waited. Around 9, we heard the first scream. Distant, from town. Then another. Then a sustained sound that wasn't a scream and wasn't a siren. Something in between, with a wavering pitch that lasted maybe 4 minutes before it stopped. The power flickered twice and stayed on. I went out to the shed at 10 because I had to know if anything else was on the band. I went out the back door with a flashlight in my pocket but not on, and I walked the 18 feet to the shed without looking up. When I got inside and closed the door, I let myself breathe. The receiver was alive. The waterfall was full of activity. Not the structured kind, random, chaotic. Voices and digital modes and emergency frequencies and noise overlapping. The 11-meter band was full of people talking. Truckers mostly. Some hams. Some people who'd dug out old radios because the cell phones weren't working. I scanned through. I caught fragments. Anyone in Hardin County. Anyone in Hardin. They're not violent until they finish the count. That's the thing. They finish the count, and then they... My wife started this morning. She's still doing it. What do I... Calling from Allenton. We've got at least 40 in the streets. They're not... I scanned past. I scanned back. I keyed the microphone. I'd never transmitted on this band before. I was set up to receive. But I had the capability. I said, "This is K8 Uniform Victor Charlie. The pattern is a count. It's counting down." The recording came from a non-terrestrial source at 27.665 megahertz on Tuesday afternoon. The clicks were a countdown. Don't interact with people who are doing it until the count finishes. I repeat, don't interact until the count finishes. I let go of the key. The band was silent for about 3 seconds, and then a man's voice came back. He said, "How do you know it's a countdown?" I said, "Because I recorded it. The first transmission had 72 clicks. The second one had 24. They're updating it. They're telling us how long we have." He said, "Who is they?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Thank you," and then he was gone. I sat at the workstation for a while. Other voices came and went. The conversation evolved. Some people had figured out the count thing on their own. Others were reporting from places I'd never heard of. A woman in eastern Pennsylvania said her entire neighborhood had been tapping in unison for 2 hours, and then had stopped at exactly the same second. A man in Missouri said his daughter had been tapping for 40 minutes, and then had gotten up and walked out the door and hadn't come back. The voices on the band were not panicked. They were tired and methodical, and afraid in a flat, used way. The way people sound after they've been afraid for too long to be afraid acutely anymore. Around 11, I went back in the house. Hadley was awake but pretending to be asleep. Pell was at the window with the curtain held back about an inch, the way I had been. "There are 3 of them in the road," he whispered. "They're not moving. They're just facing west." I looked. He was right. 3 people I didn't recognize were standing in the middle of our road, evenly spaced, all facing the same direction. The moon was up, and I could see their silhouettes clearly. They weren't moving. The dogs across the road were lying down now, side by side, also facing west. "What's west of here?" Pell said. "The elementary school," I said. He let the curtain drop. We didn't sleep. None of us slept. Around 3 in the morning, the people in the road started to move. They walked in unison west. They walked past our driveway and past Olbert Krall's house and out of sight. About 20 minutes later, we heard them coming back, or others coming back, walking east. We never saw their faces. We kept the lights off and stayed away from the windows. Brisket lay flat on the rug and didn't make a sound, which was the most unsettling thing in the house, because Brisket barked at squirrels. Saturday morning came. The sun came up. The dogs across the road were not in the yard anymore. Olbert Krall's driveway was empty. The road was empty. The 3 people who'd been standing in it were gone. I made coffee because that's what you do. Hadley sat at the table and stared at her hands. Pell checked on Wren, who was still asleep upstairs. The television was running color bars on every channel except one. A national broadcast that was running a slate that said, "Emergency Broadcast System Activated. Stand by." The slate had been up for 2 hours by then. Around 9, Pell said, "Idris, the 3rd transmission. When would it come?" I'd been thinking about this. The first transmission had been Tuesday afternoon. The second had been Friday morning. Roughly a 72-hour gap, but not exactly. There hadn't been a third yet. The count from the second transmission had been 24. And if those were hours, the count had finished sometime late Friday, around the time the people had started standing in the road. If they were something else, if they were people, if each click was a person, I didn't want to follow that thought. I went out to the shed at 10:30. I checked the receiver. I sat at the workstation. I waited. The third transmission came in at 11:14 a.m. I want to say it was different from the first 2 because it was. It was shorter. 5 seconds. It contained only the wet tone. No clicks, no binary, no curve, no silence. The wet tone, this time, did something I'd never heard it do. It modulated in a way that, when I ran the pitch tracker on it, traced out a recognizable melodic contour. It was, almost exactly, the contour of a human voice saying a single word in English. The word, as best as I could match it against my reference library of vocal contours, was sorry. I want to be careful here. I don't want to overclaim. I had a 5-second tone that, when analyzed for pitch movement, resembled the rise and fall a person's voice makes when they say the word sorry. I'm not saying an alien said sorry to me. I'm saying that's what it looked like on the analyzer. I sat in the shed for a long time. I didn't cry. I felt like I should have, but I didn't. When I went back in the house, Hadley was at the kitchen window. She was looking at the road. There was a person at the end of our driveway. A woman. She wasn't tapping. She was just standing there. She was facing the house. Pell said, "She's been there for 10 minutes. The woman didn't move for another 40 minutes. Then she turned and walked away. Around noon, the radio in the shed picked up a broadcast from a ham operator in Indiana who had connected to a military frequency. The broadcast was relayed through 3 other operators before it reached me. The content was this: the affected, the tappers, were physically deteriorating. Their core temperatures were rising in a controlled way, which shouldn't have been physically possible without external heat input. Their cellular metabolism was being driven, somehow, beyond what their bodies could sustain. They were not violent. They were not zombies. They were not infected in any conventional sense. But they were dying, slowly, while doing whatever they were being told to do by something none of us could see or hear. The broadcast also said this: the tapping was not random. When mapped geographically, the affected were positioning themselves in patterns, not visible from the ground, visible only from above. Aerial reconnaissance had photographed configurations across 3 counties in Ohio and 2 in Pennsylvania. The configurations resembled, and I quote, because I wrote it down at the time, geometric figures of unknown but consistent design, suggestive of either signal receiving arrays or signaling devices. The affected were not the threat. The affected were antennas. I didn't know what to do with that information. I still don't. I'm going to tell you what we did instead. We left at 2 in the afternoon. We took the truck. We took brisket. We took what we'd packed and what we could grab. We didn't talk about where we were going. We just went, in the way you go somewhere when staying is no longer an option, but going has no destination. Pell drove. I sat shotgun. Hadley and Wren were in the back. The road was empty. The fields were empty. We passed Olbert Krall's house, and his cars were both in the driveway, and the front door was open, and we did not stop. We made it 12 miles before we had to stop. There was a configuration in the road. 11 people, evenly spaced, in the shape of a curve I recognized. The same logistic growth curve from the 4th layer of the second transmission. They weren't tapping. They were standing. Their faces were turned up toward a sky that was overcast and gray and held nothing visible to me. Pell pulled the truck off the road into a field. We drove around them. None of them looked at us. As we passed, the nearest one, a man in a brown jacket, probably in his 50s, with a beard and gray at his temples, opened his mouth. He didn't make a sound. He just opened his mouth as if he was about to say something, and then we were past him and he was behind us. I want to tell you we made it somewhere safe. I want to tell you we found a community of survivors and an explanation and an end to the story. I won't. I won't because that's not what happened, and because the story isn't about what happened to us after. It's about the recording. We drove for 2 days. We found a place, an empty hunting cabin that had been broken into already, on a lake that wasn't on any map, owned by people who weren't coming back. We stayed there. We stayed there for a long time. The configurations stopped being visible from the road within a week, because the configurations had completed whatever they were doing, and the affected had finished their function. The world after that was quieter than I'd expected. The unaffected, the people like us, were maybe 1 in 10, maybe fewer. We didn't have good numbers. We had the radio, and we had Pell's medical knowledge, and we had each other, and we had a dog who slept across the threshold of the door every night with his ears up. I brought the drive with the recordings. I brought it because I didn't know what else to do with it. I've thought about destroying it. I've thought about uploading it. I've thought about burying it. I haven't done any of those things. Here's what I think now. I want to say what I think because the asking of the questions has weighed on me longer than the surviving has. I think the warning was real. I think it came from something that wasn't human and wasn't ours. I think the 72 clicks were a count of ours. I think the entity, I'm going to call it an entity because I have nothing better, knew that something was coming and tried to tell us. I think the underlayer in the first transmission was not a sentence we could parse. I think it was a calibration. I think it was the signal teaching itself how to talk to our equipment, the way you might tap a wall to find a stud. I think the second transmission was an attempt to be more specific. The coordinates moved because the event moved. The curve was a prediction of how fast it would spread once it started. The silence layer. I don't know what the silence layer was. I think it might have been an apology in advance. I think the third transmission was an apology after the fact. I think whatever was sending the signal could see that the affected were being used, and that the use was killing them, and that whatever the entity was, it had not authorized that use, and was sorry for it. I think the entity and the thing that drove the affected were not the same. I think there were two non-human presences here. The one that warned us, and the one that used us. I think we were caught between two players in a game we didn't know was being played on our equipment and in our bodies. But I might be wrong about every part of that. I don't have evidence for any of it that would convince a stranger. I have a recording. The recording is the only piece of evidence I have, and the recording is ambiguous. And ambiguous evidence does not convince people of things they don't want to believe. I tried to warn Pell in the early hours, and Pell, the most level-headed person I knew, the person whose judgment I trusted more than my own, told me it sounded like a transformer dying. I tried to warn Hadley, and Hadley was kind and didn't believe me. And her mother died 8 hours later doing the same pattern that was on my equipment 48 hours before. I tried to warn the band, and a man in a town I didn't know said thank you, and then was gone. And I have wondered ever since whether he made it through, and whether anyone he warned made it through, and whether any of the warning got past the second-hand transmission of one tired man at a microphone in a shed. There are pieces of this I haven't told anyone. There's a moment from Friday night I haven't told Hadley about. While I was at the radio, in the dark, in the shed, before the scream started, I saw something out the small window above the workstation. The window faced east, toward the field behind the house. There was a light in the field. Not a bright light, not a moving light. A small, steady, dim point of light, about the brightness of a faint star, but resting in the air at about head height, maybe 200 yards out. It was there for the length of one breath, and then it wasn't. I have wondered ever since whether the light was looking at me, and whether the recording I'd made had been listened to from somewhere, and whether the sorry-shaped tone of the third transmission was for me specifically, for the man at the radio who'd been told and hadn't been heard. I have wondered whether they tried to warn other people too, and how many of those people made the same mistake I did, which was to record it instead of running with it. I have wondered whether somewhere in the world there was a person who heard the warning and ran out of their house and pulled their family into a car and drove south and saved them. And whether that person exists, and whether they know what they heard, and whether they have stopped hearing it. I have wondered, sometimes, whether I'm one of the affected and just don't know it yet. The pattern hasn't started in me. I count things, sometimes, idly, the way anyone does. The slats of a fence, the steps to the lake. I haven't found myself tapping. Hadley watches me. She watches me without telling me she's watching me. Pell does too. I would watch me, in their place. We made it through. Wren is 8 now. She doesn't remember the standing people in the road. She remembers the lake and the dog and the cabin. Brisket died last summer of an ordinary old dog death, and we buried him under a birch tree, and Wren picked the spot. Pell still works on people, the unaffected, the injuries that come from a smaller world with less infrastructure and more sharp edges. Hadley is the closest thing the cabin has to a teacher. I do small acoustic work for the community we eventually found. I figured out a way to use the broken parts of the old shortwave network to relay information between settlements, because there are no satellites anymore and very few telephones, and people still need to talk. The drive is in my desk. I take it out sometimes. I haven't played it in months. The last time I played it, Wren walked in while the third transmission was running, the sorry-shaped one, and she stood very still and listened to it all the way through. When it ended, she said, "That sounds like somebody being sad." Then she went back outside to feed the chickens. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this story and believe it. I don't know if anyone needs to. The world that needed the warning isn't here anymore. The world that's here got built out of the people who didn't hear the warning and survived anyway, and out of the few who did hear it and couldn't make anyone listen. I'm not bitter about Pell. I'm not bitter about Hadley. They believed me when belief was still possible. I'm not even bitter about myself, which surprises me. I thought I would be. I thought I would carry the weight of being right too late for the rest of my life, and it would crush me. It hasn't crushed me. It's settled into me, the way a stone settles into the bed of a stream. Present, smoothed by water, not going anywhere, but not pressing against anything either. If there's a thing I want you to take from this, it's this. We're surrounded, all the time, by signals we don't know how to read. Most of them mean nothing. Some of them might mean something. The cost of paying attention to the wrong one is a little embarrassment. The cost of ignoring the right one is everything you had. I don't know how to balance that math. I don't think anyone does. But the next time you hear something you can't explain, a sound in the wall, a frequency on a band you didn't know was active, a pattern in something that shouldn't have a pattern, write it down. Record it if you can. Save it. Show it to someone. Show it to two someones. If they tell you it's a transformer dying, ask them to listen again. I keep the drive because if anything like it ever happens again, and if I ever catch another transmission on another band, I'll have something to compare it to. I'll have a reference point. I'll know I'm not making it up the second time, even if I couldn't prove I wasn't making it up the first time. I keep the drive because the recording is the only piece of the old world I trust completely. Everything else, my memory, my reasoning, my certainty about what I saw in the field that night, has been worn down by the years and by the way you start to doubt your own perceptions when you live a long time in a place where most of the people who could have corroborated them are not there anymore. The recording doesn't doubt itself. It is what it is. The 72 clicks are still 72 clicks. The underlayer is still under there, in the noise, saying something I'll never understand to someone who isn't me. The third transmission still does the thing with the pitch contour that resembles a word I know. None of that has changed. None of that will change. There's one more thing I want to tell you, and then I'll stop. About 2 years after the event, after we were settled at the cabin and the world had become whatever it was going to become, I caught one more signal. It was on a different band. It was very brief. It wasn't aimed at anyone, as far as I could tell. There was no carrier voice, no clicks, no count, no curve. It was a single tone at a single frequency for 1 second. The frequency, when I looked it up, was the frequency of the hydrogen line. The frequency astronomers had agreed, decades ago, was the most likely frequency at which any intelligent civilization would transmit a signal meant to be heard by another intelligent civilization, because hydrogen is the most common element in the universe, and any thinking thing would know to look there. The tone was at that frequency. It was 1 second long. It happened once and never again. I think it was a check-in. I think someone, somewhere, was asking if anyone was still listening. I didn't transmit back. I didn't know what I would have said. I sat at the receiver with my hand on the key for a long time. And then I took my hand off the key, and I went outside and I watched my daughter. We had a daughter by then, a small one, named for Hadley's mother. Feed the chickens with Wren. And I thought, no, not yet. Not until I have something worth saying. I'm still working on what I'd say. The drive is still in my desk. The 72 clicks are still on it. If I ever figure it out, I'll record an answer and I'll send it. And maybe somewhere, on a frequency I'll never know about, on a piece of equipment that nobody built, something will receive it and understand that we heard them. That at least one of us, in the noise, with insufficient evidence, at the wrong end of a tired week, heard them and tried to tell the others and failed, and is sorry. That's the recording. That's the story. The warning was real. I have it. I'll have it as long as I have anything. If you've ever heard something you couldn't explain, I hope you saved it. I hope you played it for someone. I hope they listened. I hope it wasn't a transformer. And if you ever hear a pattern, 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, coming from a person near you, from a radio, from a wall, from anywhere, I hope you walk the other way. And I hope you keep walking. And I hope whoever's with you walks with you. The count is the warning. The count is always the warning. By the time you hear it, the warning is almost over. But almost over is not over. There's still time. There's always a little more time than you think, if you move when you hear it and don't wait to be sure. I waited to be sure. I waited because I was a reasonable man, and reasonable men require evidence, and the evidence was on a drive on a desk in a shed in a county that doesn't exist on the maps anymore. I'm telling you now so you don't have to wait. If you hear it, go. If you hear it, take the people you love and go. Don't record it. Don't analyze it. Don't ask your brother-in-law what he thinks. Go. That's all. That's the whole thing. I'm Idris Valen. I recorded the warning. I'm sorry I didn't do more. I hope, if there's ever another one, I'll do better. I hope, if you ever catch one, you'll do better than I did. I think you will. I think the world that's left, the small, quiet world that came out the other side of this, is full of people who learned to listen, because the ones who couldn't aren't here anymore. That's the recording. That's what's on it. That's all I have.